No problem. For those that came in, we'll start in 30 seconds. Please just copy down the focus question. We are going to the next topic of the women's rights movement very shortly. So in the chat right now, do you guys know what month it is in terms of celebration? I know it's the month of March. I'm not that stupid, but do you guys know what month it is in terms of celebration?
It's Women's History Month.
It is Women's History Month, so it is a pretty cool thing. Last month was Black History Month. Now, I think you know this. I've never been the guy or the teacher to basically, do a lesson. If it's Women's History Month, do a women's history lesson. Like, whatever falls in the flow of my curriculum is what I teach. So this is one of those examples where we are going to learn about a big moment in women's rights history. But it's just because this is the next topic of the Roaring 20s. I'm not doing this as a Women's History Month lesson, but you guys can obviously use it as both. But this is obviously just the next topic. So if this was February, I would teach this lesson the exact same way. All right. But let's see how women got their biggest success or one of their biggest things going forward in 1920. Okay, so let's talk about how this kind of all goes down. Now, at this point, women have been gaining more and more rights. So we're going to spend the next slide kind of just reviewing a little bit. We're kind of just reviewing a little bit like some of the topics we've talked about already with women's rights, with the women's rights movement. We should know some big ones already. So this is a review from some of the stuff in class. So let's take a look. So you only have to copy down what's in yellow, but we're obviously going to read through all of them at this point. Okay, so we're on the same page. All right. So look through them all. Okay, and the first one should stand right out to you because we've already done it. Okay, the first step in the women's rights movement goes all the way back to 1848 at the Seneca Falls Convention. I think at this point we should already, kind of be aware of all this stuff. But this is where Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Lucretia Mott, they meet in Seneca Falls, New York. They write the Declaration of Sentiments, which follows very closely to the Declaration of Independence. And this is kind of the start of trying to, at least put on paper what women are unhappy about in this country and what are some changes they want to have. Now, one of the biggest things that they talk about is, trying to get women to be equal to men in a lot of different ways. Okay, so this is just the kind of start of it. This is a review. You should already be aware of this. Then we went on to the Granger movement, and we should remember the Granger movement and the Populist Party was a big moment for women because if you lived out in the Great Plains, women were expected to hunt. Women were expected to do pretty much all the things men did. It was really just, it didn't really have gender roles, quote unquote, like they did in the cities at the time, where men went to work and women stayed home and took care of the children. They didn't really have that out in the Great Plains. So women had a lot more political say. They had a lot more power in the Great Plains. So we've talked about that. In the first part of this unit during World War I, you should have noticed that, women started to take jobs from the men, okay, because the men went off to fight. Okay, so women started to gain some more political rights there. They started to get more independence and freedom there. And then, of course, yesterday, we looked at the temperance movement where women really led that because they wanted to ban the sale of alcohol. So women have been getting more and more rights, okay? And that's going to lead to one of the biggest successes throughout this time. And it's all going to be centered around what? Write in the chat if you can guess what this is all going to be centered around, because there's one major thing women still not have at this point. Correct. Voting rights, suffrage. Okay, suffrage is another word for voting rights for those that don't know. So we got to kind of get that. I'm going to go see how that process breaks down. All right. So this takes place kind of right after Prohibition. It actually really takes place in 1918, 1919. But we're going to look at the first feminist movement so we have a good understanding of it, because the women's suffrage and the right to vote happens within this movement. Okay? So for those that don't know, feminist is a term usually related to women. So the feminist movement is a movement where women try and get full equality with men. Basically anything a man can do, a woman can do as well. Okay? So we're going to go through this process as kind of trying to figure out, like, okay, how do women and men get the same rights when it comes to certain things? So if a man wants to be a mechanic, a woman should be allowed to be a mechanic. If a man wants to run for office, so should a woman. If a man could vote, so should women. All right, that's kind of the push, because there's these kind of gender roles at this point where men get certain things and women don't, okay, at this point. So we're trying to fix that. And that is what the feminist movement is all about. Now, the feminist movement has evolved. I'm going to just kind of show this to you to mention it. All you need to know now is the first wave of the feminist movement. And in terms of this class, all you'll need to know is the first wave and the second wave, but we won't get to the second wave until later on in this class, maybe closer to April or May. But you see that there's actually 4 waves of feminism. You do not need to copy this down. This is just kind of like, getting a sense of what the feminist movement is. Basically, what are the major goals for some women's rights leaders? So the first wave of feminism, pretty much everyone agrees with, women should have the right to vote. Women should have the right to own property, because at the time they couldn't. Okay, this would be something that would also come. And women should have the right to be in government. All right, this was really the major focus for women at this time. All right, and then as time goes on, you're going to learn that women eventually get jobs. They have no trouble getting jobs. They have no trouble running for government, but now they're not paid the same. There's a thing called the gender wage gap, which is controversial in 2021, because if you really look at the gender wage gap in 2021, it's not really what you think it is. Whereas opposed to 1960, like, men used to literally get paid more than women. Okay, actually a lot of more women were hired because they could pay them less back in like the 1960s and 70s. So they wanted to figure this out. This is optional to copy down. This is not something you need to know for the Regents right now. I'm just kind of showing you how this feminist movement has kind of grown to more present day. All right, so if you're into women's history, if you want to get some more insight, then obviously you can take a photo of this and copy this down if you want. Also, the second wave of feminism would lead to reproductive rights. This would lead to abortion a little bit. which is obviously a controversial topic we'll touch upon a little bit later on. But the second wave was more about equal pay and more sexual freedom, I guess you would say. The third wave and the fourth wave are a little bit more controversial. Like usually like the first wave, many people agree with. The second wave is a little bit more controversial because of abortion, but I think everyone could agree women and men should be paid the same thing. The third wave and the fourth wave is a little bit more controversial. So the third wave is very big on women. Basically, it basically discriminates against housewives or people that want to stay home and raise the kids. It pretty much, the third wave, which has happened more in the 1990s and 2000s, kind of before you guys were just born, was kind of like snubbing or being angry at women who wanted to be stay-at-home moms, who wanted to be mothers, as opposed to women who were more career independent, which is controversial because some people just, you know, want to stay home and take care of the kids, and there's nothing wrong with that, you know, and that kind of was going against that. So some people aren't as big a fan of the third wave. It also incorporates more different groups of women, which I guess isn't as controversial. The fourth wave is still a little, we're still unsure what the feminist movement is about. It kind of goes, the biggest thing for sure is combating against sexual harassment, like the Me Too movement. This was very big during, you know, the present day, you know, feminist movement. This is something you could see. It talks about assault, you know, sexual assault. That's a pretty big thing. Rape culture. This is another thing you may hear throughout the feminist movement. And it goes against misogyny, like basically, you know, men who are very, you know, mean and do bad things towards women. Okay, sort of thing. So it kind of goes against those. Where the fourth wave has been a little bit more controversial is, number one, the Me Too movement is good in theory for sure, but has also led to some false accusations, okay, which have led to some problems where women have accused certain men of certain, you know, things that they've done, and then they turn out to be not true, and then it kind of ruins the other person's life. So that's been controversial. And keep an eye on the feminist movement and the transgender movement have a little bit of an issue. Because the idea of the transgender movement is obviously, you know, you could be whatever sex that you want to be. You could be male, you could be female. That's more of the transgender movement, where the feminist movement is trying to be strong, independent women. And the feminist movement isn't so thrilled at times to be letting in some, you know, men who transition to transgender to women. They're not as big of a fan of that. So the third wave and the fourth wave have not come up on the Regents. I'm just kind of trying to keep you up to date with some of the feminist movement stuff, some of the things that you may hear or may see. But ultimately, the first wave and the second wave, really not too controversial, especially the first wave. I think everyone should be agreeing that women should have the rights to vote, women should own property, and women should be able to run for political candidacy. I mean, you guys all know who the vice president is. So, I mean, you see that first wave of feminism is definitely something that has been very successful. Okay, so now what we're going to do is the second slide before we do the two Regents questions. Please copy down what's in yellow again. We're going to see how women actually get the right to vote. Okay, so before we'll go to the end. So the way they actually get the right to vote is through another constitutional amendment. Okay, so yesterday we did the 18th and 21st Amendment. The 19th Amendment is the way women officially get the right to vote. Okay, who remembers in the chat what amendment gave African American males the right to vote? Who remembers what amendment that was? Do a little quick review. 13th is incorrect. Good try. That freed the slaves. 15th is correct. Okay, remember Amendment 13 freed the slaves. 14th gave African American citizenship. 15 gave them the right to vote. So just kind of try and remember that 13, 14, 15. It's okay. It's no big deal. So what actually gave women the right to vote is the 19th Amendment. Okay, it's very straightforward. If you actually read the text of the 19th Amendment, I'm just going to read it off to you. Very straightforward. I usually can remember it. It says, the right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or any state on account of sex. So basically, it doesn't matter if you're male, you're female, you're transgender. It doesn't matter. You're allowed to vote. Okay, where before this, you can only vote if you were a white or black, if you were a male. okay, only if you were male. Now, the way they get the right to vote is really through two ways, one of which you're already familiar with, okay? You guys understand protesting, okay? You understand getting together and peacefully protesting to kind of speak out against what you want. I think we've been very clear on this. You can see this year in the photo here. This year is a photo of Susan B. Anthony, okay, just so you're aware. Okay, that's a photo of Susan B. Anthony when she was going through this. Now, Susan B. Anthony would not be alive when the 19th Amendment was passed, unfortunately, but she was very crucial in helping to get the 19th Amendment passed, which I'll kind of talk about in a second. All right, here's another famous thing you'd see. If you ever played Red Dead Redemption 2, the video game, you would walk around, you'd see a lot of women in like the cities walking around with these types of things, trying to get votes for women. Women were doing this for 20, 25 years. Okay, walking around kind of with these poster boards that they would wear, you know, kind of saying votes for women, trying to convince people to change the law and change the amendment. It took a while, but eventually it got done. But the real truth behind the way women got the right to vote wasn't necessarily through protesting. It was also through this thing called civil disobedience. Okay? So what does it mean if you're being disobedient? Let's break down the word a little bit. What does it mean if you're being disobedient? You shouldn't have to Google this word. What does it mean if you're being disobedient? Okay, to follow the rules, to not follow the rules, you refuse to listen, failure to comply. Tiara, you want to tell me?
To be disobedient is to like not behave or go like against, like basically to not behave.
Correct. So you guys have all been in classes where some students are being disobedient. This is something you're very aware of. Maybe sometimes you're disobedient. Okay, when you're disobedient, you're breaking a law, you're breaking a rule, you're not doing the right thing. When you're being civil, you're doing it in a peaceful way. So I often say to students that know the uniform policy, but show up to school never wearing uniform, are practicing civil disobedience. Okay, they're not listening to the rule, but they're not really bothering anyone. Okay, that's when you practice civil disobedience. Okay, so many women at this time basically refused to go along with the idea that women cannot vote. So I'll explain what I mean. So the refusal to comply with laws or fines by active peaceful protest to show what they want. And there's a couple of layers to this. So a great example is, one of the best examples is every election day. So let's say the election of 1888, let's say. There would be groups of women that would show up to vote. Now, they were not allowed to vote. So when they cast their vote, a lot of them would get fined. Okay, only copy now it's in yellow, yes. Okay, so a lot of them would get fined. They'd have to pay a money fine. Sometimes they go to jail. Okay, if they were given a money fine, they would refuse to pay it. Okay, and basically said, like, I disagree with this law. I should have the right to vote. I know I'm not allowed to, but this law should change, so you can fine me. Okay, so many women would do this. They'd go, they show up to vote, they'd vote, they get fined. Some would pay the fine, some would not. But basically, they're practicing like and showing that that's practicing civil disobedience. They are not okay with the law. All right, and I put a little fun fact there. This civil disobedience approach would be the same approach Martin Luther King Jr. would use, okay, the civil rights movement would use. It was the same type of idea. Okay, peacefully, not necessarily peacefully protest, but, you know, kind of break laws, okay, in a peaceful way to show that you're unhappy with this. Okay, we'll look at what sit-ins were. If you know Rosa Parks' story, which I'm sure many of you do, she was breaking the law, practicing civil disobedience. She sat in the front of the bus, the segregated bus. When the cops came, she didn't throw a fuss. She said, okay, you can arrest me. That is civil disobedience. Okay, you're showing your displeasure with the law, okay, breaking the law, but doing it in a peaceful way. Now, historically, some of the biggest changes that have ever happened, okay, women getting the right to vote, okay, the end of segregation eventually in the civil rights movement, have been done kind of peacefully. All right, I've been biased when I say this, but I just know a little bit of American history, and I know Neve would disagree, which is fine. In American history, the protests and the movements that have been more peaceful have been the most effective in getting the biggest change. I'm not going to say it always happens. I'm not going to say it always works. But usually when they turn a little bit more violent and when there turns to be more riots, people are turned off from the movement. The more peaceful they are, generally the more successful they are in terms of American history. Now, that may be different going forward, okay? As Neve is going to respectfully disagree, and that's fine. You know, that could be different going forward. Sometimes violence gets the point across a little bit, but I'm just looking at an American history perspective. The big changes, okay? The big changes have come from these particular movements. Now, your argument, Neve, and other people that may disagree, you could say the Civil War. You know, the abolitionist movement ultimately ended with violence in the Civil War, so you could use that as an argument against. So you should have both sides of it pretty good. But more recently, people are all for more of the peaceful protests to kind of get their point across. All right, so, you know, kind of keep that in mind. The last things I'll kind of just mention is sometimes the 18th Amendment and 19th Amendment are known as the Progressive Era Amendments. These are just big times where there was a lot of change, okay, that occurred. And we should know, if we remember the 16th Amendment, that was the income tax we learned last unit, excuse me. The 17th Amendment said now that we now elect our senators as opposed to the state legislatures. Okay, the 18th Amendment we saw yesterday. How did Americans get independence from Britain? It wasn't peaceful. Yeah, true. Okay, that's another one where we had to use violence to kind of, you know, go through in terms of the Revolutionary War. Well, some of the protests and boycotts were peaceful, though. You know, the Boston Tea Party, I'd say, wasn't too peaceful. The Boston Massacre obviously wasn't. But like other things, okay, like the boycotts against British goods, like that could be same type of thing. Maheen says, I think violence should be the last resort. Yeah, I think there's people that could agree with it. It's a matter of opinion, okay? Don't let me sway you. You know, have your opinion. Just know that some of the more successful movements have been done peacefully. And then, of course, you have things like the Civil War that ended slavery and the American Revolutionary War, which gained our independence. So there are times where violence is needed in terms of a war. But I think the last resort thing is a good way to think about it. Okay, if a movement just starts out, you know, guns blazing and you know, doing all this violence and rioting, it's probably not the best way to go about it. Right? 16th, 17th, 18th, 19th Amendment. Okay, so that is pretty much all of the notes. Let's do some quick Regents questions before we get into the assignment. While you're doing the assignment, I'm going to play a corny music video, so you can mute the video if you want, but I will play it because I usually do, and some of the kids like it. All right, this one, I mean, this is a very straightforward question, but I have seen it before. And I did A, B, C, D instead of 1, 2, 3, 4. I apologize. So what did the 19th Amendment do for women in the United States? Okay, B2, gave women the right to vote. That's just like, you know, remembering right after a lesson. It should be easy. This is another example. When Susan B. Anthony refused to pay a fine for voting illegally in the election of 1872, this is prior to the 19th Amendment. She stated, "Not a penny shall go to this unjust claim." Her action was an example of 3 civil disobedience. Okay. So she's practicing, you know, peacefully, like she's not going to pay the fine. So she thinks the law is unjust, basically. All right. For the assignment for today, if you go to your Google Classroom, which I got to pull up, give me a second. If you go to the Google Classroom, you will notice that there is a web quest on the 19th Amendment. Okay, there's a web quest on the 19th Amendment. There are a good amount of questions, I'm not going to lie. You're going to click on this website here. Okay, so I'm going to put that in the chat there for you just so you have an easy link to it. Okay, you're going to use this website here, okay, to basically answer the 18 questions that go along with it. A lot of these are one sentence, one word answers. Okay, I don't need you rewriting in full sentences. Okay, so you could just kind of fill that in, okay, as you go. Listen, guys, between me and you, I don't need all of these questions answered. What I'd say is work on this for 20 minutes hard. Okay, if you get over 10 questions and you turn it in, I'm happy with it. Okay, this is actually usually a 2-day assignment, but since I was on parental leave, I'd just like to make it a 1-day assignment. So get as many done as you can. If you want to overachieve and get them all done, by all means, get them all done, especially with it being Women's History Month. But you're going to use the reading from the link and answer the questions on the Google Doc. You cannot write on the PDF, so just answer it on the Google Doc. All right. The last thing I'm going to do is very quickly, do you guys know this song? I'll play it. Let me know right in the chat. Okay, so they're going to take that song and make a parody of it for the 19th Amendment. Kind of catchy, kind of corny. If it's really that cringeworthy for you, just mute it. I'll never know, right? And you can just work on the assignment. But while the assignment's going on, I'll just play this. It's a 5-minute video, so you can listen to it and watch it. And if you don't like it, just mute the video and do your work. All right. Can I go back to the first slide for a sec? Once I'm done with the video, I will again, Tiana.
Caught in a bad romance. Caught in a bad romance. Whoa, won't I stop? Ooh la la, till we have suffrage. Whoa, won't I stop? Ooh la la, till we have suffrage. It's gotten ugly, they passed the 15. Still women have no right, no guarantee to liberty. Child health, wealth, and property. We'll raise our banner across this land, 'cause franchise isn't just the right of a man. You love her so, yeah, to love her so. You know we don't want to take freedoms from you, just want our rights and nothing less. We cry for freedom, oh, hear our voice and see we're equal to all men. We the whole people, not just male citizens, form this most perfect union. Caught in a bad romance. Caught in a bad romance. Won't I stop? Ooh la la, till we have suffrage. It is a horror, a cruel design that makes it criminal, a right that is mine. I want the vote, vote, I want to vote. Well, I think you're psycho, I think that it's sick. I'm queen of my home, raise my babies, that's it. Don't need to vote.
No, she don't want to vote.
The rights of citizens shall not be denied or abridged by the United States on account of sex. We cry for freedom, oh, hear our voice and see we're equal to all men. We the whole people, not just male citizens, form this most perfect union. Caught in a bad romance. Caught in a bad romance. March, march, be courageous, fighting for our rights we may just start. Greatness for the ages, freedom, it is contagious. March, march, be courageous, fighting for our rights we may just start. Greatness for the ages, remember the ladies. Not to be above, but equal to all men. We only ask to be part of this union. Comme dirait le français, c'est démocratie. Permettez-moi participer. I'm a citizen of this nation. An American. I want suffrage and independence. We cry for freedom, oh, hear our voice and see we're equal to all men. We the whole people, not just male citizens, form this most perfect union. I wanna wear pants in a bad romance. I want my suffrage and independence in a bad romance. Vota, whoa, won't stop, ha, ooh la la. Now we have suffrage.
It's a little corny, but also kind of catchy, you know. Got some good things in the video there that shows, like, you know, some of the civil disobedience and stuff. You know, not too bad. Some good stuff on the YouTube sometimes. Oh, I'm glad you liked it, Milagros. That's great. Okay, so if this was the first slide I think you were talking about, Gentiana, there you go. If it's not, just let me know. Quick thing for 8D1 tomorrow. I heard from Mr. Martinez that he wants to stop in and see a lesson with you guys. So same type of thing. I think I see you guys 8th period tomorrow. Just do your normal stuff, you know. Participate in the chat. Make sure you guys, you know, unmute yourself if you have a question and usual stuff. You know, nothing to worry about. Why does he want to come? He hasn't seen, usually he comes into my Regents class, you know, 2-3 times a year. But I think with COVID, he just hasn't seen a Regents lesson. So he just wants to come in and stop by and see how things are and whatnot. So, you know, just be on your best remote learning behavior and try and be on time tomorrow, 1:20. We're going to start. But that's just for 8D1. All right. I've done enough talking, so you guys are on your own for the rest of the period. Let me know if you have any questions. And don't go anywhere yet because I have to take attendance still.